This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for giving us your time today to come learn about the wireless risks in our children's schools and safer tech solutions that we can easily implement once we get education out in front of people. I am delighted to have with me today my co-host, Sidnee Cox, who's a retired school teacher, and she is also very active with the EMR Safety Network out in California, and also has a local group that she helps to manage with Santa Rosa for safer technology. So everybody, please join us in welcoming Sidnee Cox. And Sidnee, if you can give us a little bit of background about how you fell down the rabbit hole with the wireless radiation issue, what you've been working on, and what you see for our schools.
Well, yeah, it's been a long haul. When I first got involved with the schools, and I realized the high levels of radiation that the kids were being exposed to, and I guess people already know that I created a blocker box without asking for permission. I just created these shielding devices using foam core and aluminum foil. And this is before I knew about the signal tamers. The signal tamers you can get at lesemf.com. But this is before I knew about them. The problem with the blocker boxes, though, is that I had to make them out of foam core, and then you have to get on a desk and you have to clip them to a router in the ceiling, but it worked. It worked. It reduced the levels by 95%. I mean, it just about killed it. But you could still get a signal in the classroom. You could get a signal. Didn't kill it completely, but anyway, that's how I started doing my shielding in the classroom. And how I knew that was I felt tingles in my arm. I could just feel it in the room. And I wasn't really sensitive to it, but I was surprised because it was very, very strong. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's how I started. But that was so long ago. But anyway, right now, I'm very excited. I got involved with you also, Cece, with a group that is working with Los Angeles School District, because they want to ban cell phone usage in schools. And they haven't done it yet. They're talking about it. They want to do it at the middle of the year, January. But yesterday, synchronistically, I saw in the local paper that the Santa Rosa schools, Santa Rosa in California, are already implementing this, starting this this week, where they have kids sign an agreement that they will not use the phones during school hours. Well, actually, they are allowed to use them briefly if they're between classes, but they want them to be turned off. And I suppose they could use them at lunchtime because they have these caddies. They've already got them. They've got them in all the classrooms, these caddies, and they come in the classroom. They turn the phone off, not just mute, not just, airplane mode. Phones off, phones in the caddy. They have the class. They have the school, the school day. And then they take the phone and they go to the next class and blah, blah, blah. So, and they read, I don't know if anyone has read this, the book, The Anxious Generation. I have not, but I want to. And they said the number of, you've got it. Yay. So maybe you can talk about that because I think that's amazing. And
I will discuss this in our presentation.
Great, because that's what convinced these teachers. They said something like 86% of these teachers want this because of all the problems with the kids having focus problems. Oh, this was the other thing in the article. They said the average time that the kids use on their cell phones in school is 4.5 hours. I'm thinking, wait a minute, 4.5 hours? How long is the class? How long is the day? So that's stunning. And then I just want to say one more thing. In my curiousness about wondering about why are kids so addicted to cell phones and to this technology, I thought, well, is there some sort of a 12-step program to help kids to get weaned away from this? And synchronistically, I found out one, and I attended it last Tuesday. It's a 12-step program for people who have addiction to cell phone and technology. And there were like 30 people on this call. I was so touched. It was the most beautiful thing. I don't know if anyone has ever been involved with one of those programs, but it was wonderful. And it made me realize the depth of the destruction of that can happen when people are addicted to cell phones.
Yeah.
And I got interested in it because wherever I go, I see people with their phones right in their face. So anyway, that exists. And the one thing I want to say is that the most touching thing that one of the participants said, and this is all anonymous. You can show your face or not, only first name. They said, "I don't know what it's like to be a human anymore." And I thought, oh my God, people don't even know, because they have a relationship with this thing, that they forget how to be a human.
Oh, Sidnee, thank you so much. If you want to drop that support group link into the chat at some point today, that would be a welcome resource, I think, for our viewers today. And yeah, we are at such a juncture where we can do so much to help our children. And when you talked about the 12-step program, there's also another really good resource called Reset Your Child's Brain by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, who's a psychiatrist. And she's got a 4-week program in here to end meltdowns, raise grades, and boost social skills by reversing the effects of electronic screen time. And I had the privilege of meeting her at the first medical conference that we had on this back in 2019. And I had read her book, and I have all these little stickies in here for things I wanted to follow up on and people I wanted to talk to about this. And she came by my booth and she picked up my book and she looked at all my little yellow tags on here and chuckled. And I said, no, this is such an incredible resource. Every parent today should have access to this. So Reset Your Child's Brain by Dr. Victoria Dunkley. Okay. All right. So I have a slide presentation prepared. And for everybody who registered for today's program, I will be sending out my slides so that you can click on any link in there if it helps you to get further in your investigation on this. We will also send out the recording. And we suggest don't take our word on any of this. Know it for yourself. I've been in this field for about 10 years now. Sidnee's been working diligently for many years as well. So if anything that we've learned that we self-taught can help you come up to speed more quickly to the point where you feel comfortable taking meaningful action, that's what we hope to inspire today. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share. And let's see. Kathy, can you give me a nod if you can see this? All right, good. We're good to go. So wireless risks in school and safer technology solutions, because for everything that we have messed up, we know how to fix today. And we have such amazing resources today that we certainly did not have 10 years ago when I fell down the rabbit hole on this issue. So I'll tell you my story and how I got involved with this. That MTPW after my name simply means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. I had also earned a bachelor's in communication studies, and I just feel so honored to be able to use my speaking and writing skill set to do this work, which never in a million years did I imagine this is what I'd be doing today, but hey, here we are, right? So when my kids were in school, that was at the juncture where the industry was heavily promoting their 21st century classroom. And we are a small school in Ashland, Massachusetts, and our budgets had been cut to the bone year after year after year. And we certainly didn't have budget to get all this technology and infrastructure in. So, good doobie parents jumped in and started doing fundraising, and we got wireless infrastructure. We got iPads, Chromebooks, smartboards, mini, Apple TVs, all what we thought was going to give our kids a leg up in the world. because that's what we were being told. And then one night at book group, my girlfriend Wendy, who's an electrical engineer, told us that she was reading a book called,
Taking a walk.
oops, I'm just going to put Sidnee on mute for a moment there. She was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And in that book, she was learning that we brought wireless to market with no safety testing, and it is biologically active. And we have a lot of people literally getting zapped out there. So that was book group, and it wasn't what we were reading that night. So I just made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, something else crossed my desk, inferring that there were biological harms. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine, which is the medical group that gets the conundrum cases that most doctors haven't been trained on, they put out a position statement back in 2012 advising school superintendents not to allow wireless technology into the classrooms. So being a tech writer, I just thought, wow, is there any science behind this? So I dove in and started looking for the science. And honestly, you don't have to look very far. You just need to know to look, and you will find literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing extensive harm. And we'll be walking you through the science today. So as I began to learn about this, I started sharing information with my schools. And folks, it is not an easy conversation to have, because all of our schools have been seduced by industry with their goal of getting a one-to-one device into the hands of every child. From a marketing perspective, it's brilliant, because once you have a child as a consumer, you often get to keep them for life. But from a health and safety perspective, it's disastrous, and we'll teach you about that and why, and most importantly, what we can do about it. So I started raising my hand in my schools, and I thought that people would jump up as if we had a gas leak in the science lab at school when I told them that wireless radiation has very biologically harmful risks. And I got back crickets. Now, granted, I figured this out in the summertime, and although the kids aren't on campus typically, summertime is one of the busiest seasons for school administrators, because they've got to close out one fiscal year, open the next fiscal year, get all their supplies, get all their professional development done, get all their hiring done, get all the maintenance done. So summers are very, very busy for school administrators. And I got back crickets. So I just kept sending information. And ultimately, the school committee chairwoman, Lori Tosti, who's still our chair today, she started looking into this. She's an attorney, no longer in practice. She took time away to raise her 4 children. And she's been a volunteer in our hospitals. You know, she's worked with the women's prison program, just the right kind of human being. And so Lori and I started sharing information back and forth. Hey, did you see that the French National Library took Wi-Fi out in 2008 because of the wireless radiation harms? Did you see that pockets in Israel and Belgium and, you know, Italy are taking tech out of the classroom because it's proving to be more harmful than helpful? So, but for every good thing we tried to go back and forth with, somebody else in the community would say, well, our children deserve to have the very best that we can provide for them, meaning they wanted their kids to have this tech. So yeah, it was not an easy conversation to have, but I was so proud of our district. They started looking at this. Another school committee member, Marcia Rennie, who had been our chairwoman prior to Lori, she knew enough about the way politics work. And so she went to look to see who are the top 100 corporations supporting politics in Washington, D.C. And when you look at that top 100 list of the money, you see the tech industry, you see the energy companies, you see the wireless, the telecoms, and the utility companies riddled throughout that top of 100. So Marcia could see that there could very understandably be a conflict of interest where the public is not getting informed on these risks. So again, it wasn't easy. We had very good people, well-respected people in our community who would get up at the podium on our school committee meetings when we had this on the agenda. And, you know, they're credible people, but they're not experts in microwave radio frequency radiation. And that's what carries our signals back and forth when we stopped plugging in with wires. So by the end of the day, once they started looking at the evidence of harm, we became the first public school district in the United States to even have this sign hanging in our classrooms with baby steps toward precaution. Best practices for mobile devices: turn off these devices when not in use. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed. Otherwise, both the device and the wireless access points are constantly pulsing this radiation to make or maintain that handshake. And then they say, always place the mobile device on a solid surface, not on your body. And when I was a little girl, I can still hear my mom in the back of my mind going, Cece, don't stand in front of the TV, because she knew way back then, before we got into digital and to wireless and all of that, that our bodies have a natural electromagnetic field. Our cells whisper to one another all the time, connecting, sending signals, sending information, keeping our organs and cells healthy. Well, my mom knew that that television set had its own electromagnetic field, and that it was strong enough even way back then to overpower our own body's bioelectrical fields. So that's why we had here, viewing distance should be a minimum of 12 inches from the screen, because you don't want to be right on top of that. And then they offered to show the fine print that came with all of our devices in our IT department. They have all that, and we're going to walk you through that too. So not an easy conversation to have, but I was so proud of our schools that we became the first in the nation to even hang this sign. But sadly, they didn't enforce it. I spoke to our school superintendent. He said, we're waiting for higher authorities to tell us what to do. And we'll talk you through some really great inroads that are happening with the higher authorities. But folks, there is no cavalry coming. This is for parents and grandparents and guardians and community members to learn about, and then decide what you want to do from there, because politics takes decades. And in the meantime, we can see our kids are not developing on point. So when I realized this was just a sign, I went to higher authorities and I met with Senate President Karen Spilka. She and I had served together on our local education foundation board. And I know we have another former president, Diana Herodian, took over after me when I stepped down, and she's on our call today. So welcome, Diana. Nice to see you again. But I went and I met with Senator Spilka, and I brought with her Ashland's little sign. I brought with me the science.
Read on right or anything else?
Vicki, can you please mute, or Sidney, can you please mute Vicki? Thank you. So anyway, I met with Senator Spilka. I measured her cell phone. I measured her district director's laptop, and both devices went right off the charts. And Senator Spilka and her district director are looking at me like, really? And I said, yes. This is like big tobacco on steroids at this point, and nobody knows. I said, is there something from where you sit where we could at least give the public the right to know, just like we ultimately did with tobacco? And, you know, we are morally obliged to protect our kids from things like smoking and vaping and alcohol and drugs and tobacco and gambling and pornography. But people are simply in the dark on the biological effects of this technology. So Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office, and together we whittled out a very simple bill that would just bring the right minds to the table at the state level and figure out what to do. And in Massachusetts, that means you would form a commission, have your task at hand, figure out what to do, and then either just implement solutions or introduce additional legislation to put into the codified law what has to happen. So that was in 2014 that Senator Spilka and Aaron Carty in the Senate Ways and Means Committee and I came up with that bill. And it's been 10 years, folks, and we have done nothing meaningful to at least alert the public on this. Fast forward a couple of years, and Deb Hodgson is a citizen up in New Hampshire. And Deb became very sick and had all these seemingly unrelated symptoms. And she was going to go off of Coumadin, and she had learned that wireless radiation can have effects on the blood. So she told her family that she was going to get rid of the wireless in the home and simply use Ethernet connections instead. And, her husband and her kids were like, yeah, mom's crazy again. Because it often falls to the mom or the leading parent in the family to figure out these health issues. And so Deb had done her homework, though. She's a retired accountant, and she went forward, whether her family liked it or not, to protect her health. And she hardwired her whole home and turned off all the wireless antennas. And you know what convinced her family that, gee, maybe mom's not crazy? They had given her a plant that had sat in her kitchen doing a whole lot of nothing for about 15 months, I think it was. And when the wireless radiation was removed from the environment, that plant shot up like 2 feet in just a couple of months. So that was a little unexpected science experiment in their kitchen. And then her kids, who are now grown adults with families of their own, they've all hardwired their homes too. So it's not rocket science to fix, and we will certainly teach you how to do that today. But we have 6 active bills in Massachusetts this session, and I don't foresee anything meaningful happening. Industry is so powerful. But maybe the tide is changing. So we keep educating at the upper levels. We keep educating our legislators, our local public servants, and more. And when I send out my slides tomorrow, we will have an end slide for today's presentation, but beyond that, you will find the additional slides that I present in our general public education webinars. Today is focused primarily on schools, but you'll see resources for municipal leaders, for legislators, and so forth. So we know it all. We know how to fix this. It's just a matter of us coming up to speed and finding the courage to finally do something about it. So on this crazy journey, somebody over in Europe reached out to one of the world leading scientists and experts on this, Dr. Deborah Davis. She is the president emeritus of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's greatest database and think tank on this subject. Somebody in Europe realized that we can't fix this until people are educated on it. And he reached out to Dr. Davis and said, may we please reference your website in a little course that we're building to help educate the masses on what this issue is. And Dr. Davis said, yes, and you might want to reach out to this woman, Cece Doucette. She's a tech writer, and she's made some inroads with her schools and legislators. So I was contacted by Brett and Lynn West out of the United Kingdom. And Dr. Davis also put us in touch with Dr. Mikko Ahonen, who's one of the world's leading scientists in this field, researchers out of Finland. And so that was back in 2016. Now, Lynn and Brett have since moved on, and Dr. Ahonen and I are still working very actively on this. And we now have a little nonprofit called Safer Tech Education. And we have built a course where we can train an entire company, an entire family, a municipality, or a school in about an hour online, off-the-shelf training. And I'll walk you through a little bit of that later on. And then Dr. Davis, she is a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. She's the president emeritus at the Environmental Health Trust. She put together a panel of world-leading experts and brought them to the State House when I was trying to get this legislation put through here in Massachusetts. And she brought with her Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. She brought Dr. R.S. Sharma from the India government, who has taken what we still have here with radiation levels this high and brought them down 90%, at least on paper, in India. And that shows that with political will, we can absolutely address this issue. And Dr. Sharma had done some of the sperm studies that I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes. And she also brought Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair, who's a child psychologist, who lectures all over the world, and everywhere she goes, she hears the same things. These children today are expecting their teachers to be edutainers. When something goes wrong, they lose their minds and they don't know how to pull it back together again. When, little Jimmy knocks down on the playground and skins his knee, the children are not developing that part of the brain properly anymore. Many of them, not all, where they have empathy, where they would reach down and give little Johnny a hand up and say, hey, let me help you to the nurse's office or whatever. So Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair has another really good book called The Big Disconnect, and she takes us through every level of childhood development from the wee little ones up through high school, and says we need to get kids off of tech, or at least use it responsibly. These programs that they're in front of are not, by and large, evidence-based, little Tommy cat scratching and hitting and fighting and hiss. It's just not really what our children should be exposed to. They should be under the rhododendron in imaginative play, going deeper and deeper and deeper into imaginative play, which is helping to develop all those synapses in the brain. They should be out in nature. They should be dealing with adults and children and peers in real time, face to face. They should have touch and they should have movement in their environment. So we all got sold on the 21st century classroom, and now it's time to really take stock of how we did with that and how to move forward. And we're going to teach you a bunch of that today. So Dr. Davis brought this panel of experts to the Massachusetts State House. And I, for 2 years, was on my own with this journey. And it was just so gratifying to go to these standing room only presentations and connect with others all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who either knew or were learning about this issue. And from there, I connected with others and eventually formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And we've developed a website. Sidnee, can you please mute before you go? We're picking up some static from your movements there. Thank you. So we have founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. We have the science on our resources page. We have medical resources. We have a state efforts page to log what's going on here with the Massachusetts Medical Society, with our legislators, with the Department of Education, with the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Public Health, the Department of Utilities. So we are trying at every level. And after 10 years of doing that, I think that the magic solution lies with you and I. There's no cavalry coming to fix this. We need to start talking to our friends and our neighbors. Excuse me while I see if I can mute Sidnee for us. There we go. That'll make it a little less nerve-wracking. Okay. So we founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. If there's anything on our website, others across the country has said, hey, I like your website. Can I just copy it and, put in our stuff? And I said, absolutely. I'm a big fan of let's not have to reinvent the wheel. So if anything we've done can help you to get started, please just let us know. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the National Institutes of Health. And I said, well, I'm not a terminally degreed person. I don't have a PhD. And they said, that's okay. We just appreciate the way you present information. I said, okay, that's good enough for you. It's good enough for me. And so I flew down to the National Institutes of Health, and I had these wonderful experts join our panel. Frank Clegg, the retired president of Microsoft Canada, was visited by world-leading scientists in his home, and they showed him what this issue is. He continued his investigation and then came back after speaking to a dozen of the world's leading experts and said, wow, we are not safe here in North America. The Federal Communications Commission's wireless radiation limits are not safe. Canada's Safety 6 code, those limits are not safe. So we're so grateful to have a captain of industry speaking up on this. And he's up there in Canada. He founded Canadians for Safe Technology. And he's up there trying to get Parliament to listen, but our politicians are not listening by and large. There are a few rare public servants who are also public leaders, but most of the strings are pulled by industry now, and we'll show you some evidence on that too. So Frank Clegg flew in. We had Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, who's one of the scientists and researchers on this. He came to tell us, and we all had very short amounts of time to speak. I think we were limited to 8 or so minutes. So these are excellent resources to share because our talks are highly credible and very short. So for somebody who you just want to introduce this conversation to, you might look at that NIH link there. Theodora Scarrato is the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, and she came to talk about what other countries are already doing because others have started removing it from schools, but we have industry here and they just keep pushing their messaging without telling us the risks. We also had a gentleman named Peter Sullivan join us at the NIH. And I found Peter's work through a lecture that he gave online one time. And he was speaking, I think, to the autism community. And he had 2 sons who both wound up on the autism spectrum when they hit the preschool years. And Peter had gotten really sick too. He had been a fighter pilot, like Top Gun. And then he went on to build his engineering career in Silicon Valley. So it was like his friends. Sidney, can you please mute? Hang on. I know she's multitasking there, so I'm going to mute her again. Okay, so Peter Sullivan had been a fighter pilot. So he's up there way up high with all of the Earth's natural high levels of electromagnetic radiation. And he's in a fighter plane that has radar all over it, which is where this technology came from. It came from our military for warfare and radar, radio frequency radiation, right? And then he's inside the cockpit with all the instrumentation panels that are communicating back to the Earth wirelessly. So poor Peter got walloped with wireless radiation and got very sick, dropped an unhealthy amount of weight. His teeth started getting brittle, and he started doing his investigation. And Peter discovered that wireless radiation indeed has biological effects. And so he started doing what we should all consider doing, removing the wireless radiation from our fixed places like our homes, our schools, our offices, maybe even getting it out of our cars if we can. And he speaks to the autism community because both of his sons are no longer on the autism spectrum. And I didn't even realize that was an option. So Peter had done what a lot of folks will do. They will clean out the diet to get all these environmental toxicants out of the food source, switch to using natural products. Hey, Sidney, every time you unmute yourself, we get a lot of noise every time you move there. So unless you're speaking, can we ask that you please stay muted? Thank you. So Peter did what most folks do. He cleaned out the food. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox to pull all this heavy metal that gets lodged into our brains and other parts of the body, because one of the properties with microwave radio frequency radiation is that it amplifies around metal. So you don't want to have metal drawing that radiation even further into your biological systems. And then today he would tell families, as a first line of defense, do the digital detox. Set up your home for at least 12 hours a night where there is no wireless signal at all. And we're going to show you how to do that. So I know it sounds intimidating for those who are new to the conversation, but truly it is not rocket science to fix. And so Peter said that his boys are no longer on the autism spectrum. And I was like, wow, I didn't even realize that was an option. but apparently there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad. It came from somewhere in the environment. So when you have the opportunity to learn about this and then clean up the environment, we see remarkable recoveries in a lot of people for a lot of illnesses. Deb Hodgson, who introduced that bill in New Hampshire, all sorts of crazy unrelated symptoms, so she thought, went away when she hardwired and got the wireless out of her house. Headaches and nosebleeds and dizziness and anxiety and cognitive impairment. She'd lived in her town for decades and was not able to remember where she was going. So all of that resolved when she simply chose to stop following mainstream messaging, learn about this, and then make her own choices to have a safe environment. So it can be done. And these, again, are very useful resources. Know your audience, know who you're speaking to. What would they find to be credible? This is a good one. And then we had the first EMF medical conference in 2021. And I just want to walk us through a little bit of the glossary of terms because we're kind of in an alphabet soup here. EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. These are the spiked pulsations of microwave radio frequency radiation that is used to transmit our signals and our data back and forth. There are other forms of man-made electromagnetic fields too. The wiring in our homes, for example, if it's not done properly, it can project dirty electricity out of the wall invisibly into our living spaces about 6 or 8 feet. So some people find that if they take care of all the wireless radiation stuff and they're still getting these symptoms, sometimes they need to bring in an electrician or a building biologist to come in and help them figure out what else is transmitting in their home. And then you can fix it in most cases. So this was a huge gap that we had when I fell down the rabbit hole in 2012, as we could see a lot of people were developing these microwave, electromagnetic field, radio frequency radiation sicknesses. And there was no way to get the medical community trained. So in 2019, we had the first medical conference out in Santa Cruz, California, and it was phenomenal. And then Elizabeth Kelly developed another one for 2021 and expanded it more. And then the pandemic hit just as we were getting that ready, which it's always so much better to do a conference in person because you make so many connections and it's very enriching. But because of the pandemic, we had to pivot and learn how to deliver a medical conference online. And the blessing there is that there were 24.5 continuing medical education credits, CMEs, as well as CEs for nurses. The opportunity to earn those credits has expired, but Elizabeth Kelly, who directed this conference, she has taken the entire conference, all the videos, all the discussion panels, and put it online for anybody in the world to train with world-leading professionals at no charge. So our doctors, our dentists, our ophthalmologists, our physical therapists, our psychologists and sociologists, our firefighters, our first responders, everybody can go get professionally trained at no charge on their own time. They can just start scheduling all of these wonderful lectures into their calendars. So please take advantage. I was honored to be brought in to help organize these conferences, but also to speak on state and local policy. So if anything that we've teed up for you today will be of use to you, by all means, just jump in and do what you can do from where you are to create a safe environment. So why did my schools decide to become the first in the nation to even hang this little sign in our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices? For those joining us late, you'll find that on one of my earlier slides. I believe it was when they read the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices. So for anybody with us today who has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into your settings. for people who have a different kind of phone, if you go to, if you look it up and just type in your make and model and put in RF exposure for radio frequency exposure, you will find the fine print for your device. I know exactly where it is in the iPhone though, so I'm going to walk you through that. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have also put up a page called See the Fine Print, because these things are way deep buried. But to cover their legal backside, they've been warning us all along. For example, on the iPads, their disclaimer had said, watch out for seizures and blackouts and eye strains. Nobody knows. Okay, in the iPhone from settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. So settings, general, then go all the way down to the bottom and hit legal and regulatory. On the next screen, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. And again, radio frequency radiation that they politely call energy, because it is a man-made energy form that they've developed from radar, from our militaries. And they tell us a couple of important things in there. One is they tell us that they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're holding it with it radiating, if you're tucking it in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket or your waistband or your back pocket, you are exceeding the government guidelines for public radiation exposure limits. And as we'll show you in a few minutes, the FCC never biologically safety tested this, and they've now been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. And then when you look a little further down, it says, hey, if you want to reduce your exposure, once you know, basically don't touch a radiating device. They suggest that you use a hands-free option like speakerphone or a headset. And I'm going to pause my screen share for a moment to give you a couple of demonstrations. And remember at the beginning I said, for everything we've broken, we know how to fix it. And it's not rocket science. So when we talk about hard wiring, all that means is plug things back into your router with an Ethernet cable. And then there are these little adapters that you can buy. This one is for the iPhone. It's called the Lightning adapter. And it just plugs into your Ethernet cable on the other end, right? And then you just go in and turn off the antennas, and we're going to walk you through some of that too. So for the headsets, our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has something for ionizing radiation. That's the kind that can break the atom and do damage that way. With non-ionizing radiation, as we're going to see in a minute when we look at the science, you don't have to have heat to have harm. That's all our FCC accounts for, is how much heat does it take from a device to have harm. So the Centers for Disease Control has something called the ALARA principle, which stands for as low as reasonably achievable. That's our goal. We don't want to take anybody's tech. We want to teach you enough to use it judiciously, and then you decide what you want to do. But the goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable with that ALARA principle that the CDC has. And they use 3 principles in that. Time, so spend as little time as you can in something that's radiating. Distance, and shielding. So for the headsets, this, first of all, beware of those earbuds, folks. Once you know that all of this operates off of wireless radio frequency, microwave radiation, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore to put an earbud here and an earbud here right on both sides of your brain that's then transmitting to something probably in your bra or your pocket. So distance is important. If you have to use a headset of some sort, you don't want to use a traditional wired headset, because one of these properties of microwave radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you're plugging a metal wire into your radiating device, and then the other end you're putting up to your brain, that radiation is just going to go, woohoo, party right on up to the brain, right? And we want to try and avoid that. So this is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. So it still plugs into your device with a wire. And then it goes up to where you have your audio controls for, volume and muting. But then it does something different. It breaks off here to these little ferrite beads that break the radiation. And then the audio comes up through these hollow tubes or air tubes. No metal on them, no magnets or anything to hang it around your head. Because again, you don't want to put metal up by your brain. So just rubber tubes that give you good acoustics. And this is long, so you can, place your radiating device as far away from you as you can. So again, for everything that we've broken, we know how to fix it. And I now want to give you a demonstration because I had a really hard time getting my head around this invisible microwave radiation. And then I learned there are devices. This is the one that was recommended at the medical conference. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 radio frequency broadband radiation detection meter. And it's from a company called Safe Living Technologies. And it's calibrated and it's certified in an independent lab. So it's a good meter. It's about $400, but there are some cheaper ones out there on the market. Some in the $200 range are still pretty good, but beware of anything much less than that. We've done some side-by-side comparisons, and some of those cheaper ones are not picking up a lot of the radiation transmissions. So knowing what I know, I have done my level best to get to as low as reasonably achievable. Kathy just showed she's got one in her hand there too. Sidney just dropped the Safe and Sound Pro 2 link into the chat. So here I'm in a nice green zone. And in the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. And the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically, in 3 feet of air, how much radiation might be acceptable? Now, mind you, there is no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature, so we can't kid ourselves, but we can try to get to as low as reasonably achievable. So right now in my home, I'm at a 2, and we want to be at 10 or less. I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode, and what happens is all the antennas that are mounted in here are coming online. There's cellular, data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot, and mine's an old iPhone 7. But for people who didn't know any better and got the 5G phones, there's dozens of extra little antennas in there, and each antenna is separately pulsing microwave radiation to make or maintain that handshake. So it's flashing in the extreme. I'm gonna go ahead and go back into airplane mode so I stop radiating myself. And after a second, you see that starts to drop off and dissipate again, right? But it retained the reading. So I was at 2 microwatts a moment ago. Just putting that one device online, I went to 2,580,000 microwatts per square meter. 2 million. And in the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. So imagine what we've done to our kids in our schools, where we might have 20 or 30 devices pulsating concurrently, plus the wireless access point that's geared to throw signal all throughout the building at very high powered levels. And we wonder why our kids are no longer thriving when we have more than 60% of kids with chronic illnesses. Our social and emotional support systems in our schools, our guidance counselors, our therapists, they are overwhelmed today because we simply don't have the resources to keep up with all the harm that we're doing. So let's stem the harm. I'm going to go ahead and go back into my slides and share some things that we can do. So once I figured out that we can measure this, because once we have our data, then we have a goal. Let's see how far we can reduce it. I helped my school or my town become the first in the nation to put a radio frequency detection meter on loan in our public library. I went after a grant It took me 3 tries, 3 grant cycles, because the first time I submitted my application to our select board, which is like our city council, they had never heard of this. And they're like, we don't really understand this. Come back next time. So 6 months later, I resubmitted my application and they went, gee, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. So I went and I spoke to the director for our health department here in Ashland, Massachusetts. And Mark Oram had been around way back in the 90s when industry came in with the first cell towers. And he said that they literally wined and dined us. They took us out to fancy hotels, to fancy restaurants, and started touting all this great new technology with cell phones and cell towers. And if somebody raised their hand and said, yeah, but what about the health issues? They would say, oh, it's all well within the FCC guidelines. And by the way, you can't come after us legally. In the 1996 Telecom Act, industry worked very hard and they got it put in there that there's any health or environmental concerns, not our problem. You can't sue us. So that's kind of where we thought we were, but wireless is a whole different ballgame. There are no laws restricting us or tying our hands. And even at the community level, our hands are not tied with those cell towers. There's a lot of community can do. And in my other talks, I cover that. And at the end of my slide deck, I've got some slides in there about what we can do at the community level too. So if people say your hands are tied, that's just industry speak. But for wireless technology in our schools, that is completely within our realm of control and in our homes. So we became the first in the nation. It took me 3 tries. I had to meet with my select board members one by one, show them the science, measure their devices. And I wanted 2 meters, one for the schools and one for the library, so everybody could borrow one. And because it was so new, they conditionally gave me enough funding, the $400 for 1 meter, and said on the condition that the library trustees agree to put this into circulation. I thought, okay, I'll go meet with them. And I did. And the reason I even got the idea to put a meter on loan in the library is that when the energy industry started taking away our safer incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with those CFLs and fluorescent light bulbs, those all throw off some really bad energy, biologically active, dirty electricity. But as part of their marketing campaign, they put a kilowatt meter on loan in our libraries, and then the public could take it out, go home and compare the incandescent, healthier light bulbs to these toxic, LED, CFL light bulbs, and see how much money you would save. Once again, follow the dollar, right? And so I thought, wow, if we've already got 1 meter, let's just get a radio frequency meter too. And so at the end of the day, our library board voted 4-1 to put this meter on loan. The one gentleman who did not support this, he had his arms folded the whole time we were meeting. And you could just see he just had hogwash written all across his forehead. And I don't know what his background was. Maybe he, worked in who knows. But another one had said, well, I want to get that and I want to bring it home and see what's going on in my house. And then a third one said, look, regardless of how we feel personally, we are a conduit of information in our community. And I think we should just vote on this. And so they voted 4-1, and we became the first in the country to put an RF meter on loan. And now the conversation is so much easier to have with your local library, because libraries are having to reinvent themselves, and they now have libraries of things. I rented a disc golf set from the library. My daughter's been looking to get a sandblaster power washer thing from her library. So puzzles, games, they're loaning out all sorts of things to bring the community back together in this community center of the library. So it's not a really hard ask to get one. Out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, they also have this one that I had first put in. This was back in 2016. This is the Acoustimeter, which is right on par with the Safe and Sound Pro 2. Today, I would say go for the Safe and Sound Pro 2 because it's got newer features on it, like you can plug it in, and that way it won't eat your battery. If, say, you're electrically sensitive, you want to leave it running all the time, so you get an alarm if somebody walks in your house that's about to make you sick. So both great meters, both in the same price range of about $400. And if your library can't fully fund that this budget cycle, please reach out to the Environmental Health Trust. They have a small grant fund and they're helping libraries to get these meters on loan. And then we can do programming in your community to teach what this issue is. And then they'll have that great resource to be able to measure. So lots of things that we can do ourselves, because again, there is no cavalry coming to fix this for us. And it's really not that hard to fix, but it's a huge mind shift because industry has been so powerful in their messaging. Okay, one of the last bastions of independent reporting is our local cable stations. And I want to give a shout out to WAC-TV here in Ashland. And they sent resources to my home, and we did a 23-minute public service announcement where I just literally walked through my home with my meter and I showed the radiation levels from very common devices, from the mouse and the keyboard and the printer and the microwave oven and the decked cordless phone and the laptop. And, you know, all these things that we've been told are going to enrich our lives are actually potentially damaging our health. So I offer suggestions in this public service announcement. And then I was brought in by an activist here by the name of Patricia Burke to join her on a couple of episodes out in Worcester, Massachusetts at their local cable station, where industry came in, National Grid, and rolled out their pilot program for the smart grid for the utility meters. And that is a very dangerous proposition to put gas, water, electric, solar, propane meters on our homes that pulse this microwave radiation all the time. And in one of my addendum slides that you'll receive, I've got a slide on there about the smart meters because that's another very dangerous form of exposure. So after I'd been a guest at WCCA-TV in Worcester, the station manager said, Cece, you just need to have your own show now. So I was really honored. That's kind of what I went to school for. I thought I'd be a broadcast journalist until I got into the tech writing area. And then I fell down the rabbit hole with the wireless thing. So every couple of weeks, I'm invited into the studio, and we've done 40 episodes. Sidnee, who's our co-host today, has done 2 episodes with me about what she's done in her schools and what she's done in her community. And then my other co-host this month for the schools webinars is Brenda Martinez out of the Los Angeles Unified School District. And I just interviewed her recently. And the 2 upcoming episodes, which I just taped last Friday, will be with a gentleman from Ireland, Alan Brennan. And he's a technologist, and he teaches us how he learned about this when his kids got sick from Wi-Fi at school, and what we can do with our IT directors at school to teach them how to reduce those full blasted exposures. They just get hooked up at maximum power, because who wouldn't want maximum power until you realize that that's maximum harm as well. And you can dial it down 90 some odd % on the power levels and still have all the connectivity that you think you need. You need to reassess how much do you truly need, but that's another story. So I invite people to come out to our Tech Safe series, and these are 28-minute episodes, so you can watch them pretty quickly. But it'll give you a well-rounded feel for what people are learning and teaching us in this space, from parents, technologists, doctors, scientists. We just love these conversations because it makes it all the more real for all of us to pluck up the courage to do something for our communities. All right, so let's look at the science. And again, we say, don't take our word on any of this. Learn the facts for yourself, but we'll tee it up for you. So child and adult cancers. For years, the industry got away with saying, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, way back 2 decades ago, our FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was informed that indeed this looks like it could be harmful. So they opened up an investigation that was conducted by the U.S. National Toxicology Program. Now, that's the branch of our National Institutes of Health that does toxics research, and they are arguably the gold standard in the world. They did a study, the largest study on anything they've ever done, $30 million. And at the end of the day, they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. Clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Should have been front page news all over the world, but we'll cover that in a moment. The industry gets a hold of these good studies and says, oh, that's just one study. You need more than one study to prove anything, right? Well, right on the heels of our NTP study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy concluded another multi-million-dollar study on cell towers, the base stations. So we did the cell phone, they did the cell towers. So remember, it's 2-way microwave radiation. And they found the same findings as the US found with all of this cancer, DNA damage, acoustic neuromas, thyroid cancers, and more. So we don't need more science. We need to be informed, and we need to find the courage to take action, and then ultimately public policy will catch up. They also found the DNA damage, and we know that's the roadmap to grow proper anything from a plant to a person to a biome of any sort. And then there's infertility. So when I started reading the science myself, it was these infertility studies that got me on my feet. And because we didn't have these other studies yet. But when I started reading the sperm studies, for example, they've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable or programmed cell death or apoptosis in 4 hours of exposure from a laptop. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. I had just sent my oldest daughter off to college with her MacBook. Our youngest had just entered high school. So that Christmas, we thought we'd give her a leg up, and we gave her a laptop for Christmas. And where are both my daughters using theirs? But right on top of their reproductive organs. And now we have multiple studies on women's reproduction, that it causes higher miscarriage rates. Excellent study that's never been challenged out of Kaiser Permanente on that one. And these infertility studies, the sperm studies, have been repeated and revalidated. So we have solid science here. And then neurotoxicity. So Dr. Hugh Taylor heads up the OB/GYN program at Yale Medical. And Dr. Taylor has done some of the rodent studies because it's unethical to do these studies on humans. And he found that when you expose the pregnant mice to a cell phone's radiation for a number of hours a day, when she has her babies, those pups come out and start bouncing off the walls of the cage, much like a child showing symptoms of attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And he has a beautiful website called the Baby Safe Project that you can look at. There's a wonderful 3-minute video for parents out there saying, look, we are in a new day of parenthood in the digital age. We need to protect our fetuses. We need to protect our children and our pregnant women. And then there's autism. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist, now retired. And she sees huge connections between what we know scientifically this radiation does to the brain and what she sees in the families that she was caring for. And as she states it, the brain and our bodies can only take so much, and then you get to a tipping point and you spill over into the autism spectrum quite often. Alzheimer's used to happen to people in their 80s and 90s, and then it started happening in the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and in some cases, people in their 20s are getting an Alzheimer's diagnosis. Dr. Martin Pall, again, P-A-L-L, has culled the science, and we know that early onset Alzheimer's is also tied to radiating the brain, and we can't keep doing it and expecting outcomes that we would have had years before we were all immersed in electropollution. So one of the challenges is that industry has been so powerful in their messaging that it's hard to get credible information out to people. And we're so very grateful when environmental groups like the Environmental Working Group get funding to put experts on their staff. And the Environmental Working Group has a PhD on staff now who works on the wireless radiation issue, among other responsibilities. And in recent years, they have come out with some really nice fact sheets. So as a mom, I first learned about the Environmental Working Group because every year they put out the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen list for pesticides. You know, what food should you really try and get organically? What produce might be okay? Maybe it doesn't, maybe the pesticides and herbicides and stuff don't soak as deeply into the part that you're actually eating. So I already had great respect for their work. So I'm just delighted that they put out these fact sheets. And here's just two of them. This one is protecting kids from wireless radiation in school and at home. And this one is talking about the radio frequency radiation effects on the nervous system. So children are not just little adults. Their very biological systems are still under construction. Their central nervous system, their immune system, their eyes, their skulls, their brain, you know, the whole thing. The DNA is still forming, and this damages DNA. Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues, with great thanks to our friends at the Environmental Health Trust too, have shared this modeling. When we as adults put the cell phone up to our head, that microwave radiation is pulsating into our brain about a third of the way. These are head models turned sideways with the yellow dot being the ear. And when a 10-year-old child puts that cell phone up to their head, they're microwaving about 3/4 of their brain. And on a 5-year-old child, they're microwaving about just about all the way through that brain. So we have to step up, come out of our comfort zone and start protecting our children collectively. The short-term effects, the good news is that just with one of these little education sessions, people come back to me time and again and say, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to hear about it. I run my life on my devices, but I recognized a lot of these symptoms, or maybe even one or two of these symptoms. And I took a chance and I created a sleep sanctuary. And my goodness, I slept through the night for the first time in ages. Or my children's behavioral issues started calming way down when we chose not to microwave them, pulsating them with these microwaves all night. So I mentioned earlier that the Earth has its own natural electromagnetic field. There's a scientist named Schumann who figured out just how frequently the Earth pulses that frequency, and discovered that we get this beautiful healing energy 7.8 times per second. That's now called Schumann's resonance. 7.8 times per second is what we're kind of calibrated to be in tune with. When we got so fancy with digital technology, we started going from hertz. 7.83 hertz is the unit of measurement. That's what the Earth does. To kilohertz, to megahertz, to gigahertz. When we started using cell phones and routers and stuff, that's 2.4 megahertz, I believe, or the cell phones were going at like 900 megahertz. But anyway, mega means 1,000,000 times per second. We're getting jackhammered with these spiked erratic pulses of microwaves. In the gigahertz range, We are in the billions. And so more is not better. More is really detrimental to our harm. And I'm going to go through some of the symptoms with you, but please know that for more than 2 decades, the Americans with Disabilities Act has already been recommending accommodations for electromagnetic sensitivity. So we didn't make this up. This has been going on for decades. We've just been kept in the dark. Insomnia. So remember, the industry spun it that, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified. Well, now we know. Now we know many different mechanisms of harm, aside from the cancers and the infertility and the autism and the ADD and the ADHD. We are light beings. We operate off of light and darkness through our 24-hour circadian rhythm. And in the wee hours of darkness, our body does a lot of cell repair and regeneration. But what happens when you leave this man-made invisible light energy form pulsating all night? Well, our poor brain thinks the lights are on, and it's over there going, do, when's the light going off? When's it going to get dark so I can release the melatonin from the pineal gland in the brain that will then go in and regulate sleep and help to clean up all the debris in the body from the everyday cell repair and regeneration and escort that out of the body. We leave the lights on 24/7, and it's no wonder that we start seeing this domino effect of biological sickness happening when our own body's mechanism for cleanup and repair and sleep, cycling is this disrupted. So some people will say, oh, I feel fine, I'm doing great, and good on you. But we need to know that this is cumulative with exposure. So the longer we are exposing ourselves and our children and our pets and our pollinators, the greater the risk that you're going to hit that tipping point and we're going to see a lot of harm. I mentioned the birds, bees, and trees. There's a slide further down in my presentation slides that I'll be sending out that you can look at that information too. But today we're focused on the kids in the schools. So insomnia is a big one, but literally create a sleep sanctuary and see what happens. Everything that's on your device, your clock, your alarm, your camera, your games, whatever you've downloaded, is there to enjoy without radiating yourself. If you're not actively sending and receiving data, turn off all those antennas in your settings and then measure and make sure you got them all. But once you create that sleep sanctuary, people really start seeing a much better quality of life again. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, even ear bleeds, fatigue, chronic fatigue that people just can't seem to get their giddy up to go anymore. So let's talk mechanisms of harm there. We have some protective membrane around our brain called the blood-brain barrier. And that creates a barrier. So as the body does escort toxins out, they can't get in there to these sensitive areas and wreak havoc. Well, with thanks to Dr. Palpatcher and other scientists over the years, they have identified that this constant pulsation of microwaves can break down that blood-brain barrier, cause it to open, and then when the toxins are supposed to be going out, they're actually able to get into that brain tissue. And we have all these crazy neurological illnesses that we never had before: PANS, PANDAS, ADD, ADHD, autism, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. We can make some very small changes and have some incredible results. Another mechanism of harm is something called rouleau formation. And in my little brain, it sounds a little bit like those candies, Rolos, that came in a stacked up chocolate caramel sleeve. I used to love those before I had to stop eating junk food. But that's not far off of the rouleau formation effect. So our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen to all of our organs, all of our systems, our skin. Every cell in our body needs to have proper oxygen levels in it. So what happens when you expose under a microscope our blood to this microwave radiation. Instead of these free-floating, nice ovals or circles of red blood cells, they start looking like bottle caps, and then they start magnetizing and glomming together. And so now you've got this chain of deformed blood cells that are trying to get where they can go, and they can't necessarily get there anymore. So when we talk to doctors and doctors start talking about oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species, this looks to be one of the main contributing factors here. So we need to give our blood a break, allow our bodies to clean up, and stop radiating ourselves. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities. So just like the birds and the bees, they've got magnetite and other mechanisms built in that keep them synchronized to the Earth's electromagnetic field. And boy, are we doing a number on them today. No wonder we have species disappearing by the dozens. But we also have our own navigation. We have little antennas in the surface of our skin that alert us if we're getting into, say, an area that's too hot or an area that's too cold. They will tell us to go and regulate our systems so we don't get into trouble. And our skin is getting overpowered by these microwaves. So some common symptoms, some people talk about the hot ear when they have a cell phone up to their head. People start getting flushes and rashes. The gentleman who did our logo for us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, he lives in the next town over. And he figured this out because his leg was going jiggity, the nerves in his leg, and his doctor couldn't figure it out. So Chuck started doing his own research, came upon the wireless stuff, and guess where Chuck kept his cell phone? Right in that pants pocket where he could just reach down and get it. And so he removed it. And guess what? He was lucky to not be so far along that the damage was irreversible. He was able to get his leg nerve endings to go back to normal again. So again, reduce the amount of time and create distance. And then, we are bioelectrical chemical beings. Our cells whisper to each other through these electrical circuits all day, every day. That's why we do EEGs. That's why we do EKGs. We're monitoring our body's electrical circuitry. And when we overpower ourselves with this man-made radiation, it does a number on all of our organs. Heartbeats that may be going too fast or too slow, arrhythmias, palpitations. I've heard some describe it as it feels like somebody's sitting on their chest when this radiation starts hitting them. High and low blood pressures, difficulty breathing. And cognitive impairment. We can't keep polluting the environment of the brain. And at our EMF medical conferences, it was just breaking my heart when the doctors and the scientists were warning us, if we don't stop radiating ourselves, this electropollution is going to cause more and more of these outbursts in society, like we've seen with anger and behavior issues and shootings. And it is physiologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain as well. So we can't keep doing what the industry has put upon us and expect that we're going to be okay. Same thing with the anxiety and the depression and the suicidal ideation. Yes, it has to do with excessive screen time and all the bad influences out on social media and the addictions that's being built into the apps. But we need to know that this radiation is actually hitting the central nervous system in the brain the same way that drugs and alcohol and pornography and gambling and all of that are doing. So we need to step it up. And we're so grateful that just this month, the International Commission for the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields has just put out this position statement asking that we step it up and get going on this. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity is a humanitarian crisis that requires an urgent response. And they have world-leading scientists published on their board, and you can go out there if somebody wants to look for real credible scientists, and we can put you in direct contact with them. Everybody wants the same thing, safe technology. So as I was coming up to speed on all of this, I kept scratching my head because I thought, surely, if this is as bad as little me can figure out just by doing research, somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? And it wasn't until 2015 when Harvard Law School Center for Ethics put out this 59-page report that is free and online called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And I was never a political person. I couldn't tell you the first thing about it. But this was my missing puzzle piece. Look at the graphic that they put on the cover of Captured Agency. It's a revolving door. And sadly, that's what most of our federal agencies have become, is sock puppets for industry. They've gotten their own industry people in there to lead up the FCC, the FDA, the CDC, the EPA, you know, all of them. There still are some good people there, but Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who retired from the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, she oversaw that National Toxicology Program study that found clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. She said, yes, there is definitely industry capture, but there are still some good people up there, but we don't have anybody left in our federal agencies who are experts on man-made radiation. So it's got to come from us, and we have to push it up. And that is what she believes will help to take meaningful action at the federal level. But, you know, in Captured Agency, they liken this to the Big Tobacco Playbook, and that's pretty much what it is, only it's worse because we can't smell it. We can't see it. It's just pulsating all around us until we invest in a measurement device, and then we can see it. So ProPublica did another good article a couple of years ago on this, and when the National Toxicology Program determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, that should have triggered public policy, but it didn't. Instead, the gentleman who's in charge of the radiation control area at the FDA turned around and went over to the FCC and said, we don't really believe that studied. Keep doing what you're doing. Well, one might ask, what would ever possess this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren to do that? Go do a little digging, and you find out that Dr. Shuren is married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the big tech firms and the other big firms. So there's no cavalry coming, and sadly, this goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. Back in 2011, they had an investigation, and they determined that man-made electromagnetic fields, radiofrequency radiation, was a group 2B possible human carcinogen. Now, that's in the middle of 5 categories. What they didn't have at the time were the animal studies. And now that the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini study and others have determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors, there is another investigation open today, but you'll be hard-pressed to find it because there are censorship things happening. So if you just go do a search, World Health Organization, EMF, you'll probably get something from way back when saying, oh, you know, the jury's still out on this. But if you go to this link here, you will see the information that they have reopened their investigation. They want accountability for not only cancer, but infertility, the impact on children, the impact on people with electrical sensitivity, the impact on the environment, and more. But there appear to be conflicts of interest. Even at the World Health Organization, there are 2 groups that look into EMFs. One of them was the group of highly qualified scientists and doctors whose life's work is researching this. And then the other group is a self-appointed industry group, and it looks like this new investigation has fallen into their hands again. So again, no cavalry coming. People are working hard at every level, and we're so grateful to the doctors and scientists who are working at these levels. But for today, nobody's protecting your children. So although we want to focus mostly on the radiation inside the schools, it's worth noting for our schools the cell towers. Now, these started out in industrial parks 300 feet up in the air. And then industry, because they kept promoting more product and services, they need more bandwidth, more capacity. And so they started putting up more cell towers, and sometimes not even on a tower. They'll put them right on a building, right on a rooftop. And that is a very, very harmful solution. So it's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science. When I started doing my investigation, I got way in over my head, and then I couldn't remember good resources that I wanted to go revisit or share with others. So being a tech writer, I just created a very simple research repository that I called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So I created a navigation panel, and you're more than welcome to go pound around in this. If you go to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, on my resources page, I've got links to all of these pages in my research repository. But this is the one, a snapshot of it from cell towers. And they're telling us that you should never have a cell tower within 500 meters of where people are. Now, 500 meters is 1,640 feet. And the way they came up with that number, which in itself is a compromise, is the science in the epidemiological studies. I had to learn that word too. That means what's actually happening out in the world, the epidemiological studies, versus the ones that are happening in a lab or inside a person, the in vivo and the in vitro. So epidemiological studies are showing us that there is a neurotoxicity and death curve within 1,640 feet of a cell tower that starts to come down at that distance. It doesn't actually catch up to normal population neurotoxicity and death rates until almost double that. So we should never allow a cell tower anywhere near our homes or our schools because they are extraordinarily toxic. We have schools out around the country who have figured this out and have put up a good fight and gotten them moved, but it is hard as heck to get a cell tower up once it's gone up, or get it down once it's gone up. You can go out in the US to this antenna search website and type in any address, and it will give you a return of all the cell towers and these big macro cell antennas. That's what the big ones are called, or macro antennas. It'll give you a 3-mile radius return. And when I do it in my neighborhood here, I have a couple hundred of them nearby. When I put in the downtown Boston address for our state house, more than 4,500 of these giant antennas, which, by the way, broadcast for miles, more than 4,500 of them in a 3-mile radius. Our cities have gotten so electropolluted. And this is just one Boston neighborhood. Look at all these cell towers, all these antennas dropped right on top of this neighborhood. Now we add these 5G small cells. So what is 5G? It means 5th generation technology. About every 10 years, industry comes up with something new to make a new revenue stream from. Our friends at Safe Tech Hawaii have given us this nice little recording here, about 5 or 6 minutes long, to tell you what 5G is and isn't. But the industry is spinning it up that we're going to have all of these faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. It all sounds so sexy and wonderful. Take a moment to go look and see who's buying up the entertainment industry for all those faster download speeds. Well, it's the same parent companies that own the wireless industry. It's a new revenue stream for them. And 5G doesn't stand alone. It still has to have the backbone of 3G and 4G signals. Those are the longer wavelengths that can penetrate through, buildings and get to where your device is. But all that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves, and that's what they're calling 5G, 5th generation. But because they're so small, they get disrupted and the quality of the signal degrades with anything in its path, like a tree or a raindrop or snowflakes. or buildings. So they have to bundle all these different frequencies together. So we're really getting a whole new layer of microwaves in addition to what was already so toxic before. So what does the industry do to get their signals out to your 5G devices? They say, well, we'll just put cell towers everywhere. We're going to put one every 2 to 12 houses, right at the curb, outside your home, right outside your bedroom height. So they can pump signal to your devices and everybody walking by. That's what 5G is. And they are targeting our schools, and they're using the fear factors saying, oh, gee, in a crisis, you're going to need to have really good cell service. Well, after the crises that we've had with the mass shootings, our school administrators don't want kids to have cell phones in their hands during a crisis, because then they're not paying attention to the adults who are giving them life and death instruction. After the crisis is over, the children are allowed to access their cell phones. So a lot of schools are putting away cell phones now. But the industry is targeting schools to put cell towers and now these 5G small cells right at the most vulnerable population of our children. And at a time where we're facing climate crises and heating like we've never seen before, our cities want to have a strong tree canopy to help cool our communities in the summertime. And what is industry doing? They're coming in and clear cutting trees to get their 5G dinky little signals to go through. So it's just a raw deal on so many levels. And U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal up in Washington, D.C. is from Connecticut. And there was a congressional hearing with the Commerce Committee with industry. And he said to these two industry lobbyists, so please share with us, how much money have you invested to make sure that 5G is safe? Independent studies, not industry funded studies, but independent studies to prove that it's safe before bringing it to market. And these two industry guys just went, hamina, hamina, hamina. And then in the end, we're made to say, well, gee, we don't actually know of any studies that have been done. So Senator Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. And we are. And then Computer World and others who cover, tech are saying 5G is a bad joke. It's not even giving us any better, faster signals than what we were already getting with toxic 4G. So 5G is just another revenue stream for industry. Okay. So that's all the bad news. I'm going to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes talking about the good news and what we can do about it and all these great resources and tools that we have at our disposal today. So at home, in your office, in our schools, all of our routers have Ethernet ports in them. Go get your Ethernet cables back. If you have to buy any new ones, upgrade if you can the extra couple dollars to get something called shielded. That'll make sure that the dirty electricity off of the electric and magnetic field coming on the wires themselves isn't radiating out into the room too. And most of us have more than one device today that's transmitting, and there's a solution for that too. Get like an extension box for electronics. This is the little one that I'm showing here. It's little, right? And you plug in one main cable from your router into here, and then just get separate cables and plug them in, and then get the devices or the dongles that you need for each of your devices, and then plug those in. So the first step, simple and inexpensive hardwiring. And then the second step is you got to double back and turn off the antennas, turn off the cell phone antennas, cellular data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot, 5G. Same thing with the laptops, turn off the antennas. So not only are you getting a safer connection, but you're going to get a screaming fast signal. It's going to be far more reliable. Hardwired connections use far less energy than wireless systems, 10 times less energy. And so if we're really going to get serious about climate, we need to stop using wireless systems as our primary connectivity. So turn off the antennas. And then the third step is to measure, because these, with 5G and the Internet of Things, they're looking to put antennas into everything that you're buying, your appliances, your child's Go Potty, your child's baby diaper monitor that will tell you if your child has soiled their diaper and give you a ping on your radiating cell phone. We just need to come back and get off of all these bells and whistles and get back to true parenting again. Pick up the baby and do the sniff test like we all did, and be there with your child so that you know if they have soiled themselves. So we've kind of lost our minds, but we didn't know any better. So now the pendulum swings back to center. Once we know better, we can do better. So that's what you and I have control over right here, right? And in our schools, this is what it can look like. There's that little dongle connected to this device, and you go in and you turn off the antennas, and the IT department can just make that be the norm. This is a device that has, it's kind of like one of the switches, but it's cuter. It looks like a spider once you get all the things in it, or a ladybug if spiders are scary. But we have solutions for everything. And our friends at Tech Safe Schools have a whole toolkit. They can teach our IT departments how to go in and lower the power on these wireless systems to still get connectivity, but without just blasting us at full tilt all the time. So Martin Luther King Jr. taught us when we have meaningful change in our world, it comes through 3 channels. One is the public learns and gets engaged, and that's what we're hoping to inspire today. 2, it finally goes through the courts and we have laws for protections. And 3, public policy catches up. I'm going to spend just a moment showing you that there are so many good people working on all of these things today. So have hope. We know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose when you first learn about it, but we all have hope because there are meaningful inroads happening right now. The FCC has been sued by the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and a number of other parties across the country. The judges were presented with 11,000 pages of evidence of harm that was filed into the public record. And the judges looked at it and said to the FCC, well, what do you have to say for yourselves? And they said, oh, the FDA said it was fine. So they said, where's the homework from the FDA? And of course, Dr. Jeffrey Shuren has not done any of the top to bottom scientific review. And so the courts sent it back to the FCC and said, you need to do better. You need to account for children's vulnerabilities to the environment, to the elderly, to infertility, to electromagnetic sensitivities, and more. And this being August, it's now been 3 years since that Friday, the 13th of August of 2021, when the courts remanded it back to the FCC to do better. They haven't lifted a finger. They've done nothing, and the court didn't give them a deadline. So again, there's no cavalry coming, and it will take a couple more years, I'm told, before they can really go back to the court in the FCC and said, hey, get on this. So there's a groundbreaking lawsuit happening here in Massachusetts where Verizon put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood. And for the first time, a board of health got engaged, did their homework, and was looking to take Verizon to court. Verizon got an injunction against the Board of Health. There's a lawsuit now to remove that injunction so that the Board of Health can do its job and force Verizon to turn that toxic cell tower off or move it away from this neighborhood where 17 children and adults got so sick they have had to abandon their homes. Some have already died who didn't leave their homes. And then here in Massachusetts, for the first time in the United States at this Faith School lawsuit, the courts recognize that you don't have to have heat to have harm from these devices, which is what all of our engineers have been trained on, physicists, technologists. They accepted the evidence of harm presented by scientists and doctors that there are biological effects at the non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level radio frequency exposures. So lots of good things happening. Children's Health Defense has a number of lawsuits going on all over the country. You can check those out, and there are lawsuits happening all over the world. We just never hear about it because mainstream media is owned by these industries that control the messaging. So I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that we helped to get a law passed in New Hampshire. Deb Hodgson introduced me to her state rep, Patrick Abrami. He was an engineer, and he thought that wireless had to be fine because you have to have heat to have harm. And then when Deb started sharing with him the information, they got in his car and drove down from New Hampshire. We sat at my kitchen table for an afternoon and helped him to connect the dots. Why have Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re and others long since recognized this as a world-leading risk? And they don't cover for damages. They put exclusions in their policies, which can leave our towns and our schools at legal liability. Why does that fine print that we talked about earlier even exist in all of our devices? And why is the FCC ignoring the science? And why do they allow 100 times more radiation than other countries do? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Our FCC guidelines are from one device. What is happening to our children when you put them in a classroom with dozens of devices and wireless access points radiating all the time? So we brought in the experts, we testified, and in less than a year, Governor Sununu signed into law that they had to investigate the health and environmental impacts of 5G, and that soon turned into all wireless technology. And in 7 months' time, we got that law passed, and in the next year, a commission was formed with highly qualified experts, and they came out with this groundbreaking report that I keep in my signature, so anything that you've gotten from me has this in there, documenting the conflicts of interest with the federal agencies and the wireless industry, and recommending 15 things we need to be doing: educate the public, put signs up on everything that is radiating, protect our children, get our public spaces, including our schools, public or private, transition out of primary connectivity with wireless and get things hardwired, get our federal agencies and federal delegates on this. So this is a 400-page report, but in the first 17 pages, you will very quickly be able to find their findings and recommendations. And here, if you're an audio-visual learner, Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire served on that commission and does a 20-minute presentation here and shares his slides. That's probably the leading document that we have in our country today. So what can we do for our schools? We opened up a new elementary school here in Massachusetts, and I went to the open house, and as the tour group moved on to each room, I hung back and I used my, iPhone 7 in airplane mode, and I took little video clips. Go out and watch just how toxic our schools have become. Silicon Valley executives, as the New York Times reported, are sending their children to schools with no technology, not hardwired, not wireless. They know that is not how a child properly develops. They need movement, they need touch, they need to be interacting with trusted peers and adults, and they need to be out in nature, not in front of screens. There is an ophthalmologist, a corneal surgeon down in Louisiana who got a law passed to start addressing all this technology in our schools. And they came up with school best practices for digital devices. That's worth looking at. Maryland, through the help of the Environmental Health Trust and other advocates down there, the state became the first in the nation to publish recommending hardwiring in our schools, and they have a fact sheet to help us. Cyprus, the country of Cyprus, put out safety recommendations for studying at home, hardwire that technology and turn off the radiation. They have recommendations for age limits on how much screen time and how often to take a break. We now have an epidemic of myopia in our world, in children, because our eyes are meant to be perpetually scanning the horizon. And here we are, hour upon hour, at this short distance in front of a screen that's not only radiating us, but changing the shape of our eyeballs so that we now have an epidemic of myopia. But please know the Netherlands, Finland, and others are taking tech out. And we see this happening in the US now too, where they're at least starting to take the cell phones away from the school environment, but others are taking tech out altogether because of the distractions, because of the decreasing outcomes in education. So we got taken for a ride by this industry, and now it's time to take back our children and our schools and our homes and our way to be in the world. So these cell phone bans are great. It's a great way to open this conversation. And as Sidnee mentioned in the beginning, we are partnering with Brenda Martinez out of the Los Angeles Unified School District. And we have worked with her and with Patty and Doug Wood of Tech Safe Schools. And they have just issued a letter to the LA Unified School District to say, you know, congratulations for having the courage to start this cell phone ban that's going to happen next year. Please know that when you do that, you can go one step further for safety and make sure that all those devices are turned off before they get stored. So you don't have some group of students sitting by wherever those cell phones are getting radiated by 20 or 30 of them at once. And then we can take it from there and learn how to turn off the wireless access points when they're not in use and really create a safe learning environment for our kids. And look at all these incredible tools that we have. The U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools, with great thanks to a scientist named Dr. Tony Stein, years ago, she negotiated with them to come up with low EMF best practices. And the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools is a certifying organization for green schools, and they have this guide for low EMFs. And then here's Patty and Doug's Tech Safe Schools here. They have a whole toolkit for you as a parent. If you reach out to them, they will send letters to your school leaders when you're ready to help them help you open the conversation. My hard lesson learned, folks, is don't go it alone. One voice is so easily swept under the rug in these schools with administrators who are already so overwhelmed with everything else that's going on in our schools today. So don't go it alone. We have these toolkits, and in a minute, we're going to invite you to become a champion in your town. Let's get everybody around you educated first, and then as a diplomatic, polite, well-intended group, then go to the schools. So please know that the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already come up with prevention curriculum, age-appropriate kindergarten through grade 12. Dr. Alexia McKnight and I, she's a radiologist who got really sick after a smart meter was installed on her home, to the point where she couldn't remember out in traffic if that green light meant stop or go, and she had her daughter in the car. That's how toxic this radiation can be from any source. But she and I were invited in, and we did 4 professional development programs throughout the day when her school district was having their PD, or professional development day. So we have a 46-minute video there that you can look at, and we would be honored to come in and do training with your schools. And then here's that online training course. We have off-the-shelf training ready to go that can be completed in about an hour online. It provides a certificate of completion at the end, so that if your school is going to track compliance with this, that makes it easier for them to track. And it also gives us a handy tip sheet at the end with reminders of what we need to do for safe technology. And then our friends at the Environmental Resources or Environmental Health Trust have amazing 1-2 pagers you can print out. Even as I know somebody earlier asked about colleges, yes, that absolutely need to be addressed, because those kids are sleeping with their cell phones. There's wireless access points all over the place. So yeah, there's lots of resources here we can help you with. And then for all of the other professions, we have the first medical school textbook. We have a nursing textbook now that has a chapter in it. Dr. Cindy Russell has founded Physicians for Safe Technology, and here's our medical conference now available at no charge. Our school nurses, our town health boards can all go get the training they need. And then there will be pushback, because everybody's been taught that all Wi-Fi all the time is the way to go. So here are very credible resources by Frank Clegg, for example, the leader of Microsoft. He retired from Microsoft Canada as the president. He pulled together doctors and scientists and building biologists and put out an incredible paper on how we can have safe, healthy buildings. So lots and lots of excellent resources for you to dive into when you get my slides. So next steps. Let's continue learning. right? For some of you, this is new. For some of you, you may be chomping at the bit to get started on this, but always let's keep learning. I learn every day. And we will always have these upcoming webinars. Our next one, like this one today, is going to be on the 29th of August. Just double check. Yeah, 29th of August at 6 p.m. Eastern. And you're welcome to come back again. We have people come back time and again. They'll kind of home in on one thing and go home and fix that and then come back and learn something else they want to try. So you are more than welcome to come back all the time. And then I was honored to be asked by Mary Ann Tierney of Safe Tech, North Carolina. She's a registered nurse and a building biologist. She just did a book read on the anxious generation, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness by Dr. Jonathan Haidt. And he, at the end of this book, says, you know, unless we find out that there's something in the air or the water, I say it was when the smartphone was given to our children that we started falling down. And I think he will be really inspired to know that, yes, it is the smartphone, but it's also the radiation from all the wireless. So we'll be reaching out to him to help him learn about that as well. But I foresee doing more community book reads around this because it's a really great way to empower parents and educators and, you know, mature students to really start taking control of technology instead of it controlling them. Please know that Bert Wolf on PBS does a travel show. He did 2 episodes on wireless radiation. And this film, Generation Zapped, a little bit of my work with the schools and becoming the first in the nation to even have our little sign, a little bit of that is featured there. But you'll more importantly hear from the doctors and the scientists and people who are electromagnetically sensitive, and the solutions to get to safe technology. It's 74 minutes. It was part of the United Nations Independent Film Festival. It won Best Documentary at the DC and the Women's Independent Film Festival. So it's really a good film to just start the conversation with your friends and your loved ones. And then do community screenings. I've been brought into many, many public libraries. We screen this at the National Institutes of Health. We've done a screening at our State House. It's a great tool that came out in 2018. And then I am more than happy to be brought in to bring everybody up to speed with what's happened between 2018 and now. And then when we start posting things out on the internet or we start talking to people about this, everybody today has been trained by industry. As soon as you open your mouth and go, I think there's something wrong with wireless tech, all of our brains have been conditioned to go, tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorist, I don't have to listen to this. So based on something that Dr. Joel Moskowitz at the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley came up with when that NTP study came up, he had done something about fact versus, you know, fiction on the NTP study. So I asked him if I could use his model, and I came up with EMF points of confusion versus fact. You can quickly skim this to see all the messaging we've been getting and what's the other side of that. So I have folks who have come back and said, yeah, I printed out a bunch of copies of that and I just keep it with me in my glove box or, you know, in my briefcase. And anytime I open the conversation with somebody, I hand this to them and that will lead them to your website where they can access that in electronic copy and then click on the links that, you know, are useful to them. But I mention it here because there are a lot of people online who have lost their ability to be polite. And you don't want to get into a fighting war because that's just throwing good energy after bad. So just post the facts. And if you want to post this for those who actually truly want to learn, they find that helpful too. And then here's my little cable show that I do a couple times a month. So feel free to check back there for new episodes. So let's keep learning together. Let me know how we can help you learn in your community. And then here's where rubber hits the road. I am inviting people who have the fortitude and the courage to be a champion in your community. I would like to have 10 different towns. It can be domestic here in the US, it can be Canada, it can be Europe. I don't care where. I want to see what happens when we start having meaningful connections and conversations inside our own communities and stop waiting for higher powers that be to come fix this, because they're not coming, and certainly not anytime soon, and our kids are getting sicker and sicker. So I would like to work with 10 champions in 10 communities to pilot this program and see if my hunch is spot on. The first thing we would do is to educate the community, and we will design flyers and we will put invitations out to come together and let's have forums. It can be a community conversation at your library. It can be with your best friends in your living room. It can be with the parents of the kids that your kids have been growing up with. But let's start a true, meaningful conversation. And I can be brought in to facilitate that. If you're within driving distance, I'll come in person. If you're not within driving distance and you have budget, I can be flown in to do them in person, or I have a paid Zoom account and I would be honored to do it through Zoom. But getting everybody around you that you can think of educated first, I think, is where the power lies. And then once we have a group of professionally behaved, we don't want to be nut jobs coming out going, we're frying our freaking kids. You know, there's a little lady inside me jumping up and down going, we're frying our freaking kids. But if I let her lead, then the brain only has the options to go into fight, flight, or freeze, and nobody can learn anything in that. So we come at things very fact-based, very empathetically, very diplomatically. And once we have a group of parents who will show up, they don't all have to talk, but they do have to show up, because one voice can be swept under the rug. So once you have a good group, then we go talk to the schools. And it's going to be important to show this invisible toxin. So I have a small grant that will allow me to buy radio frequency detection meters and have one sent to you for your community. And at the end of the day, if the school doesn't have funding, we would like to see that meter donated to the schools. But we want you to have it in hand so that as you're educating your community, you can be sure to be able to show that radiation exposure. Seeing is believing. And the beauty of what we're going to do is we're going to build ourselves a support system. So we'll set up a calendar where we will check in with one another regularly, talk about lessons learned, what's working, what backfired, how do we fix this, how do we present the facts to whomever, and we will do it together. So we will have regular strategy meetings and we will figure it out as it comes. But I'm about done with waiting. We need to get out there because we're starting a new school year, and we know that until you get this radiation turned off, our kids are not going to be thriving as they should in our school districts. So we'll always celebrate too, even the small things. You know, let's hip hip hooray for each other, because it's hard work and it takes a lot of moral courage to do this work. But if not us, then who? So I invite you to reach out to me at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. If you do contact us, it will come directly to me. Here's my email address directly. I know Sidnee has been working so hard in her community too, and here's how you find her, the EMR Safety Network, and here's Sidnee's email. And she's a school teacher, a retired school teacher, so she's lived this, and she knows there is so much opportunity to protect our schools right now. So thanks everybody for listening. I will stop the screen share now, and let me go back to Sidnee. Are there any questions that we should field from the chat?
I don't know if you can hear me okay.
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, I'm on a new computer right now.
Yeah.
I'm going back and forth. I've been looking at the chat, lots of interesting, I don't think there's any specific questions, just a lot of comments.
Okay.
I think Sarah Amanoff, I don't know if she's still on the call. She was concerned about exactly what you're talking about. What are the next steps? What are the best ways to approach school districts or a principal? And she did mention that she talked about the problem with earbuds.
Yes.
And she was scolded by the principal because she was scaring the students. So I think you know, just like what you said, I loved it. You know, there's a little person inside you thinking, we're frying our kids, but you can't, you have to be so diplomatic and approach it in such a delicate way.
Mhm. And you know, even baby steps, we don't have to fix it all at once. What's the one thing you could do today? Maybe tonight you decide to create a sleep sanctuary. You can still use your clock, your alarm, everything that's on your device. But maybe you'll wake up feeling better tomorrow. And maybe that'll help you have the courage to say, well, maybe I can become a champion in my community. Maybe I've never done anything like this before, because that was me. I certainly had never done anything like this before, but look at what we can do when we work together and support one another. So I hope people will think about it. I hope they'll reach out. If you know somebody in your community who's already done activist work, I actually didn't even know what that word was until one of the legislators called me and said, hey, congrats, you're an activist. And I said, I am, how come? I didn't know what it meant, but that's the word for somebody who wants to activate change for good in your community. So seriously, anybody who wants to step up and do the work, and we know life happens, we know everybody's plate is incredibly full already, but if we don't address this, who's gonna? And our kids are getting so sick, and it's really foolish to let them stay in an electro-polluted environment. All you got to do is change the settings. All right. Would anybody like to raise their hands and ask any questions live right now? Okay. Well, we are just beyond the top of the hour. I had promised a 2-hour workshop here today. So thank you, Sidnee. I am so very grateful for your support, your assistance, your inspiration. And I know we will be seeing much more of each other as we keep working on the schools. So, all right, everybody. Have a tech-safe day. We'll get the video and the slides out in the coming day. Take care. Bye-bye.